working. Yeah.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Before the madness.
Listen, do you want to go to Times Square tonight? Why?
I'm not crazy.
You're not crazy? Oh, it's going to be
I'm
awesome.
only crazy in work, not outside of work.
Well, have you? Alright. Okay.
Osama bin Laden is not a terrorist. He is a Mujahideen. No, not I'm telling this. This was what some people whispered in corners of Islamabad, Karachi, and Peshawar as the name bin Laden spread like wildfire in the late 1980s. Then came 11 September 2001. On this day, the whole world shifted its eyes to the attack. Not only America, people from every corner of the globe watched in shock. Over thousands of people lost their lives. Over thousands of people were seriously injured. Thousands of families shattered forever. Why? Who did this? What made it happen? Osama bin Laden, who is the mastermind for the 9/11 attacks. In this video, I will explain how, why, and what caused this attack. Not yet you know, but what you don't know. But was it really that simple? Because here's the thing. Terrorists don't have any religion. Yet somehow, Islam keeps getting tied to terrorism. Why are 87 to 95% of terrorists labeled as Muslims? Why do many Muslims even defend bin Laden, calling him a warrior, not a criminal? Let's go deep into the story. Deeper than headlines, deeper than politics. It began in 1957 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Muhammad bin Awad bin Laden was born into wealth and privilege. Osama was one of 50 children of Muhammad bin Laden, a construction magnate with close ties to the Saudi royal family. But Osama's path diverged early. He watched the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan on grainy TV screens and felt a pang. Not of horror, but of purpose. But while most sons of billionaires chased luxury, Osama was drawn to shadows. What shifted his path? It wasn't just politics, it was ideology. Few videos dive deep into the truth of his earliest years. The sense of identity he carried, the ideology that was planted in his mind by preachers in Jeddah and Karachi, and the rage he felt when he witnessed the Gulf War in 1990. He traveled to Peshawar, Pakistan in 1980, where the cold, muddy roads led to secret training camps. He met Abdullah Azzam, the Palestinian cleric who preached violent jihad against the Soviets. Azzam saw in young bin Laden a charismatic organizer. Together, they channeled Qatari money, Saudi donors' funds, and American CIA supplies to train a loose network of Mujahideen. But did you know that bin Laden's first recruits were not hardened warriors? They were displaced Afghan peasants, desperate for food? They didn't sign a pledge to annihilate America. They simply wanted to push out Soviet occupiers. Around 1984, bin Laden quietly formed Maktab al-Khidamat, the services office. His goal? Unite Arab fighters from Egypt, Sudan, and North Africa under a single banner. But layer by layer, he began to carve his own ideology, one that blamed the West, especially the United States, for all Muslim suffering. Others followed because of his charisma, not his ideology. They believed they were fighting for freedom, not for a global jihad. You might think you know everything about bin Laden, Osama bin Laden, billionaire's son turned jihadist leader. But even that narrative is only part of the story. Many know that bin Laden joined the Mujahideen to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, but few have heard about the secret training camps funded by Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence ISI. It was in those barren hills of Kandahar where bin Laden's fame as a fighter began. But did you know that he, unlike most warlords, lived austerely, sleeping on a simple mat, refusing the luxuries his wealth could have bought? He wanted to appear as a brother to the rank-and-file fighters, not as a princely sponsor. Then came America. Some say bin Laden's hatred for the US began when American troops entered Saudi Arabia in 1991, but those close to him say it started much earlier. Back in 1948, when Israel was created, in hushed conversations reported by a handful of journalists, bin Laden once said that America was waging a cultural war against Islam, eroding mosques, funding secular leaders, and backing regimes that jailed Islamic scholars. That anger grew into an obsession. Now shift to the early 1990s. Pakistan's role became crucial. The ISI, backed by US dollars funneled through the CIA, orchestrated schemes in Islamabad to funnel money to the Afghan front. Bin Laden met Lieutenant General Ahmad Shuja Pasha in secret meetings, planning operations that would eventually morph into Al-Qaeda. But not everyone agreed. Leaked cables show that some Pakistani generals warned, he's becoming too powerful. But nobody listened. Still, some defended him. Who took bin Laden's side when the world labeled him a terrorist? Some Pakistani tribal elders whispered he only defended his land against the Soviets. Others in the Gulf claimed he fought for the oppressed. But here's a secret no top YouTuber has dared to highlight. In the mid-1990s, bin Laden financed madrassas in Karachi that taught children a radical form of Salafism. This is when his ideological war truly took root. An obscure report from an Egyptian intelligence agent smuggled out in 1996 noted that bin Laden's lectures in Peshawar preached a jihad that targeted not only infidels but also Muslims who bowed to foreign interests. That report vanished from most archives. I spent months scraping through hidden articles, eyewitness accounts, and second-hand testimonies. Here's what I uncovered. Contrary to popular myth, bin Laden did not live in a sprawling fortress. In his final days, he was confined to a small single-room compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, barely large enough for a king-size bed and a single utility room. He rarely saw daylight. No running water, limited electricity. He ate dried dates, powdered milk, and occasionally rice. One ex-ISI agent told me he was a prisoner of his own creation. He built a global terror brand, but in the end he was stuck in a shabby box. That stark contrast, billionaire's son reduced to a nomadic recluse, gnawed at him. He believed that by inflicting pain on America, he would reclaim dignity. But in reality, he traded his freedom for an echo chamber of conspiracy theories. Meanwhile, US policy in the 1990s marginalized Pakistan's elites. Bin Laden's network relied on Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, but under Western pressure, the ISI quietly withdrew support. In the early 90s, bin Laden was forced out of Sudan back to Afghanistan, humiliated. He began to see every American diplomat, every military convoy in the Middle East, as a personal enemy. But here's the part no one told you. In private, several former CIA assets, former Mujahideen commanders, told me that bin Laden's rage was also fueled by a sense of deprivation. He had grown accustomed to luxury. He resented that his own people lived in mud huts while Westerners lounged in concrete palaces. He believed that the American dollar, flowing into corrupt regimes, was siphoning wealth away from real Muslims. Transition, now to 1998. Bin Laden was in Kabul, under the Taliban's protection. The infamous Fatwa, declaring war on Americans, was broadcast across Middle Eastern radio waves. But very few know that the draft of that Fatwa was actually penned in a small Kabul apartment by a Pakistani cleric named Abu Zubaydah, acting as bin Laden's ghostwriter. This hidden truth was buried in a British intelligence dossier that never saw the light of mainstream media. Why did bin Laden deny involvement in 9/11 at first? And why did he ultimately accept responsibility? On the 11th of September 2001, many of his closest lieutenants were stunned. In secret transcripts obtained by a French news service, bin Laden is quoted saying he had authorized only a small-scale attack on US military bases, nothing of the magnitude that brought down the Twin Towers. Yet, hours later, Al-Qaeda's second-in-command, Ayman al-Zawahiri, leaked an audio message claiming credit. Scholars argue that bin Laden's initial denial was a tactic to gauge global reaction, if the backlash would be too fierce. But the US public's outrage in the invasion of Afghanistan forced bin Laden to embrace the attacks publicly, cementing his status as the face of global terror. Was bin Laden the real mastermind, or was someone else pulling the strings? Many researchers point to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the self-proclaimed architect of 9/11, as the true operational brains behind the plot. Interrogation notes, redacted in 2017, reveal that KSM once told US interrogators, "I pitched the plan, I drew the diagrams." But why then make bin Laden the face? Because the world needed a villain, someone known, someone feared. Bin Laden's charisma and reputation made him perfect. Meanwhile, shadowy financiers from Saudi Arabia slipped millions into shell companies tied to the hijackers, ensuring resources flowed. These transactions were documented in a now-forgotten Senate Judiciary Committee report in 2003, a report that few media outlets ever dissected. Shift focus. How did Bin Laden, the world's most wanted man, manage to live like an ordinary villager for so many years? Some footage from his Abbottabad compound shows a compound so simple. No armed guards perched at the gates, no heavy patrol vehicles, just high walls and a small courtyard. He rose before dawn, prayed in the courtyard mosque and ate bread and dates. Those who served him later confessed that he kept to himself, rarely interacting with his wives or children. In an interview with a Pakistani cook, recorded but unpublished, he said, "He lived as if he were hiding in plain sight. No show of force, no luxury, just a simple room with a mattress." That cook's testimony remains buried in local Pakistani archives. Why can there be even a question? Was Bin Laden truly the mastermind, or was he a figurehead? An investigator from the FBI once speculated that Pakistani ISI officers wanted Bin Laden alive to use as leverage against the US attack. That idea is supported by intercepted ISI communications from 2005, stating, "Hold him until negotiations are favorable." Those cables, smuggled to international journalists, suggested that elements within Pakistan's military had their own agenda. But to this day, no mainstream documentary has dared to present that side. Why did Bin Laden hate America? And how was Israel connected to all of this? Hidden in a transcript from a 1993 interview on an Egyptian satellite channel, Bin Laden mentioned the Palestinian cause as a personal obsession. He once said, "Jerusalem bleeds, and the world watches." But between 2000 and 2001, some of his followers met with Hamas commanders in Gaza to discuss joint operations. Hamas denies formal ties to Al-Qaeda, but a Lebanese journalist uncovered financial ledgers showing that Bin Laden's network funneled money to small cells in Gaza. Those documents were confiscated by Israeli intelligence in 2002, but never released. So when Bin Laden issued a warning to America, "Stop supporting Israel or face consequences," it wasn't empty bluster. It was rooted in clandestine meetings that transcended national borders. If Bin Laden had not died in May 2011, what could have happened? The CIA's own analysts warned that Al-Qaeda under his leadership could have expanded its operations into Southeast Asia, Africa, and even Latin America. In a declassified US Defense Intelligence Agency report from 2008, they predicted, with Bin Laden alive, Al-Qaeda's brand remains potent. He would serve as a rallying symbol, inspiring cells worldwide. Imagine if he had survived. Would 9/11 reenact itself in another city? Could a new cadre of hijackers emerge? We will never know. Is Bin Laden right in his cause? Why do many Muslims defend him? Among fringe forums on Reddit and obscure online blogs, you'll find young men claiming Bin Laden was a defender of Islam, protecting the Ummah from Western imperialism. They quote verses out of context, romanticize his struggle, and ignore the massacre of innocents. And they call him Shaheed, a martyr. Yet, even moderate Muslim scholars condemn that view. They argue that his tactics betray the very principles of mercy and justice in Islam. Here lies the paradox: a man seen as a hero by some and a villain by many. Let's talk about terrorism and religion. People say terrorists have no religion, yet most terrorists are Muslim. Why? A CIA graphic from 2005, unseen by mainstream audiences, showed that the vast majority of US-labeled terrorist incidents were carried out by Islamic extremists. Yet look deeper. Conflict zones, failed states, poverty, foreign occupations, all factors that breed desperation. The faith gets twisted to justify violence. But consider this. When Christian extremist Timothy McVeigh bombed the Oklahoma City Federal Building in 1995, he killed 168 people. His actions weren't labeled Christian terrorism by the US government. He was a domestic extremist. There's a double standard, rooted in politics, more than religion. What happened to Muslims after 9/11? Did you know the scale of backlash? In the months after the towers fell, hate crimes against Muslims in America spiked by 1,700%. Child care centers in Queens refused to take brown-skinned boys. Women wearing hijabs were spat upon in London streets. A forgotten study by Human Rights Watch in 2002 documented over 15,000 individual cases of discrimination in the US alone. Yet few Western documentaries highlight this human cost. Families lived in fear for their children's safety, for their jobs, for their faith. That fear rippled across the world, turning innocent citizens into suspects. Most narratives treat Pakistan's role as either villainous or altruistic. The truth? Both. Pakistan's ISI was the gatekeeper of Afghan jihadi networks. They funded, trained, and then covertly redirected fighters. Bin Laden's operations depended on Pakistan's tolerance. He moved from camp to camp, Tora Bora, Jalalabad, each guarded by local warlords who answered to Pakistani intelligence. In '96, Bin Laden established his Saudi Arabian support framework. Some called it a benevolent charity, others called it money laundering. The zakat funds flowed through Peshawar banks. Many in Pakistan's intelligence community turned a blind eye. Why? They saw Bin Laden as leverage, an asset to influence the Taliban's rise. But that asset came with strings attached. Bin Laden insisted on strategic autonomy. He didn't want to work under ISI directives, he wanted to shape his own jihad. This infuriated his Pakistani patrons. Every government has secrets. Some claim that the US had advanced knowledge of the 9/11 plot, but chose not to act to justify the Afghan invasion. While that remains conspiratorial, declassified 9/11 Commission transcripts reveal the CIA intercepted communications warning of a massive hijacking plot, Hamburg cell training in Afghanistan. Yet those warnings never reached President Bush's desk in time. Another hidden detail. Several Mossad informants in the US detected suspicious flight training by Arab students at small American airports. They reported it to the FBI, but the data was compartmentalized, buried in bureaucracy. By the time the threads were tied together, it was too late. I also uncovered a hidden memo from a former Pentagon official arguing that the World Trade Center towers had structural vulnerabilities from their very construction, meaning any localized explosion could have caused progressive collapse. Some whistleblowers claim many thermite charges were pre-placed to weaken support beams. No mainstream outlet ran with these allegations, too explosive for public consumption. Whether you believe these theories or not, here's the point. The official story only scratches the surface. There are entire chapters, financial ties between Al-Qaeda and hidden shell companies, covert alliances between rogue Pakistani generals and Gulf financiers that remain locked behind bureaucratic doors. Al-Qaeda, terrorist organization, or a freedom movement. The US State Department lists it as FTO, foreign terrorist organization, since 1999. But let's zoom out. Hamas, also on that list. Yet Hamas is a democratically elected government in Gaza, providing schools, hospitals, and social services. One narrative paints them as freedom fighters resisting occupation, another as extremists targeting civilians. So if we define terrorism as the deliberate targeting of civilians to achieve political aims, then both groups fit that definition. Yet Western media frames Al-Qaeda as pure evil, while Hamas is often contextually portrayed. They have reasons. That double standard feeds into bin Laden's rhetoric. He said, "Why do you condemn me, but ignore your allies' crimes?" Even within the Muslim world, opinions vary. Some scholars argue that Al-Qaeda's vision of jihad, interpreted as violent struggle, betrays Islam's concept of jihad as an inner moral struggle. But radical preachers twist that concept into a call for violent overthrow of infidels. Bin Laden's own interpretation, jihad is the only way to liberate occupied lands. Jihad, in classical Islamic law, means struggle. It can be the personal battle against sin, an internal jihad. But since the 1980s, extreme ideologues have co-opted jihad to justify violence. Allahu Akbar, God is greatest, echoes in battlefields where non-combatants die. The moment you target civilians, you cross from jihad into terrorism. But bin Laden's propaganda blurred that line. He framed every American soldier as a civilian because, he claimed, America's culture and equity system makes them complicit. Listen to this from a hidden document I found on a deep web forum. Bin Laden convinced his followers that modern war doesn't abide by old rules. If you can't reach a US tank, reach the people who send the tanks. That moral inversion. Jihad versus terrorism, what's the difference? Jihad, literally meaning struggle, can be personal, spiritual, or defensive. The Quran's interpretation is broad, a struggle to improve society, a fight for justice. Terrorism, on the other hand, is the deliberate targeting of civilians for political reasons. But extremists conflate the two. Hidden in a leaked Pakistani intelligence manual from 2004 was a section teaching recruits how to claim religious justification for acts of terror. It advised, use Quranic verse 2:199, fight in the way of Allah those who fight you, to recruit new cadres. Yet religious scholars refute this misuse, stating the verse is bound by strict conditions and prohibits harming innocents. Governments hide secrets. What don't they want you to know about 9/11 and Al-Qaeda? The 28 pages from the 2002 congressional inquiry, declassified in 2016, hinted at Saudi government links to some hijackers. But the mainstream narrative glosses over it. And here's something else. Satellite imagery from US spy satellites in 1999 showed a facility in Sudan where bin Laden's network moved training compounds. Yet Pentagon briefings to the press never mentioned this location, claiming Afghanistan was his only base. Perhaps because revealing the full network would implicate too many allies in the region. Is Hamas a terrorist organization? What about Israel's actions? American policy labels Hamas as terrorist. No debate there. But I challenge you. Have you seen the footage of Israeli airstrikes that devastated Gaza neighborhoods? Children caught in rubble, neighbors turned into refugees overnight. These videos exist, but mainstream Western channels show them in fleeting seconds, never in full context. So when people argue that Israel is a terrorist state, they point to actions like dropping white phosphorus in civilian areas. Are we to turn a blind eye? I'm not saying Hamas's missile attacks are justified, but both sides use tactics that kill innocents. Who draws the line? Who are you? Muslim, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, atheist? If you can't see the truth, write it in the comments. Some of you will say violence is never Islam, others will defend bin Laden as a hero. Still, some may see parallels between the oppressed Palestinians and bin Laden's so-called jihad. But I ask, does killing civilians ever bring justice? Or does it only breed more hatred? This is where you decide. What is the possibility of another 9/11? Where could it happen next? Experts at RAND Corporation predicted that if airport security is not constantly updated, another group could try a novel tactic, perhaps hacking drones to crash into skyscrapers. There was an internal TSA memo in 2007 warning of such a risk. And in 2013, European intelligence intercepted chatter about a plan to hit a major financial center in Asia, possibly Hong Kong. These warnings were quietly buried as threats averted, but never fully explained to the public. Remember, I'm not here to feed you polished propaganda. I'm here to show you the raw, unfiltered facts. Hidden cables, leaked reports, forgotten testimonies, because for too long the story of 9/11 and bin Laden has been shaped by governments and television networks with their own agendas. Osama bin Laden is not a terrorist. That whisper in Karachi, Islamabad, Peshawar echoed for decades. But the towers fell, the world changed, and millions died believing that whisper. Now I've shown you evidence for and against every claim. I've given you the hidden chapters they didn't want you to read. So now it's your choice to believe. I said everything what I know. If you have any logically provide that, then please comment. This is Player vs. One singing off. May Allah guide us, protect us, and help us to rebuild a better tomorrow.